All right, so I'm here with Dr. Jaquish, long anticipated. Really grateful he took the time out of his busy schedule to make time for me, answer some questions I know a lot of you guys have had. I'm going to have kind of a longer intro here to set the stage of what we're trying to do here in this interview. You can see this is labeled, we might change this, but the most hated man in fitness. I don't know if that's really true or not, because I think he's a good guy, but I think maybe just misunderstood might be the more right term. So I think and I think that's true. I think a lot of the hate or misunderstanding really has to go against you is probably maybe because your outspoken attitude, maybe the marketing claims, possibly the title of the book. We'll probably get into this a little bit. The training system, possibly that just using bands, it's only one set, you relatively few exercises, maybe your take on nutrition. I'm going to stop there because there's probably a lot of things that you have strong opinions on that we'll get into. Yeah. And I don't want to say I don't really disagree with much of what you said. I think maybe I have some areas I just have personal preferences. So I think that's one area that I'll kind of talk about. I honestly, the way I come with the X3 is I probably sound like a fanboy and it sounds somewhat biased. You know, I got them all sitting here. It's a nice little display there. I just like the product itself, how it looks, the branding. To me, it's like, I don't care if you said this thing cured cancer. I still would just like the product and I would just be buying it and using it regardless of whatever you were saying. Yeah. So, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But what I want to do with this interview is to kind of jump right into the questions. We got some relatively tough questions, common questions that I've been hearing. I'm sure he's been hearing. And I kind of told John up front that instead of making this a traditional kind of interview that he's done a lot of interviews, I listened to a lot of them. They all sort of kind of sound the same. Nothing against him. These are just traditional, book tour stuff and, setting the stage for his product and his brand, who he is. I'll reference some of his great interviews down below, especially his most recent TED Talk. There's a lot of background information if you guys want to check that out. And it's a relatively new video. A lot of people have already seen it. So I'll link that down below if you guys want to see that. What I want to do is kind of break this thing up into kind of three parts. So getting into you, yourself, kind of Dr. J, your background, your training history, answering some of those questions, getting into the brand, the X3 brand itself and products, and then also certainly variable resistance training and X3 training and just your overall take on those. So really briefly, just kind of talking out, again, we get a lot of your credentials are everywhere, but just a little bit about you, and then maybe clarify that too. The old question about, did you go to a accredited university and is your doctorate official? Let's get to that too.
Yeah, that's a funny one. That's just really a rumor that was started by trolls. Now, if you look up the university, the damning piece of information is it didn't start with accreditation. Well, no university does. Sort of like you're not born with a driver's license. You got to go pass a test. So, when the university was founded in 1992, it didn't have accreditation. So I got criticism because on day one, it didn't have it, but it has it now. I liked going to Rushmore University. I thought it was awesome. Now, picking your university to do your doctoral degree, you really have to decide if you want to go into academia. So it was a new university. It didn't really have much of a reputation, but I knew I was going to go into business because I had already invented a series of medical devices that treated bone loss. And I mean, this is like when somebody really wants to beat up on me, it's like, okay, I invented a series of medical devices that reverse osteoporosis, a disease that kills as many people as breast cancer. And it's the most effective way to address osteoporosis that's ever been clinically trialed. And it has no side effects. It's like criticizing where I went to school is like criticizing my third grade spelling tests.
It's funny too, because I don't know if many people really know about we don't have to go into that because that'll take a whole lot of time, but the OsteoStrong business and brand and what you're doing is pretty amazing and what that was.
Yeah, it's $1 billion business. Like,
and I don't think people
you
really
want
know
to talk about
it.
that. You want to talk about my school?
Yeah. And I think I should have prefaced this that I picked up your book a few months ago and I read the whole thing. It's a great book. It's also a primer to the X3 system. It's actually, I think it should be kind of bundled together. Most of it's the core content's on the website, regardless as far as the training content. Sure. But I think when I first saw this come out, I probably had the first knee-jerk reaction most people have said, because I saw it. I'm like, okay, sounds controversial. And then when I clicked on just what you were, and I saw that were bands, immediately in my head, I just thought, okay, this is just, he's trying to sell his product, and that was it. And I kind of disregarded it too. And I think that might be where most people are kind of stopping and ending with you.
Well, yes. So I get accused of a clickbait title, but scroll down your feed on YouTube. They're all clickbait titles.
Right.
You want you to click on them.
Yeah.
And so like I could have called, my book, a better resistance training method. And I would have sold 100 copies for sure. But I sold 200,000 by calling it weightlifting is a waste of time, because a lot of people wanted to read it thinking, I want to read this so I can prove this guy wrong. Or it's like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Like I want to see what he has to say, because that's a pretty bold statement. So, is it clickbait? I don't know. I can back up that statement. I would say weightlifting was a good use of time, but now that we understand variable resistance, I don't think it's a wise choice of how to spend your fitness time or fitness energy.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I want to get to
Yeah,
that towards that third segment and to stay on the, and I normally never do this, but I got so many questions and stuff with you. I don't want to interrupt you, but I
sure,
want you to make sure you say everything.
for
Uh,
sure.
People have asked a lot of questions. Again, we're on the personal subject here that, okay, well, either your body, this body transformation, you looking like this, either they'll accuse you of, first off, I guess the question is, how long have you been using variable resistance? Is that all you've been doing? Do you just use X3? And how much of your results are attributed to the years? Like I've heard this criticism of you that all your size was put on through traditional means or TRT, quote unquote, versus the actual X3 product itself.
Sure. I was in a bad rugby accident. I was playing semi-pro rugby at 28 years old. Huge amount of testicular damage. Went from a normal level of testosterone, I assume, because I never had it checked. Why would you at 28? To 163 nanograms to the deciliter. So I was told by my cardiologist, you probably need to be on TRT, otherwise you'll have a heart attack in your 30s. So, of course, I believe the same stuff that I heard on the news, like, well, wait a minute, testosterone, doesn't that make people go crazy and kill their family members? And fortunately, I had a really smart cardiologist that's like, no, that's just what they say on the news. It's and so I got my prescription for testosterone replacement therapy. Between the ages of 28 and 40, I was lifting weights the entire time with TRT and got nothing out of it. Maybe 5 pounds of muscle, but I really just put on a lot of fat and told myself I was delusional, like most people who they just get fatter and they're like, oh, I'm putting on some size finally. You're just getting fatter. Like, and we'll go into the whole like the fitness delusion, how people think like what they're doing is really productive and they're just wasting their time. So I was one of those people for 20 years. And I mean, deep down, I realized I was getting fatter and that was the only size I was getting, but I was doing standard fitness training, standard weightlifting. And I didn't want to stop because I knew I would lose my size. What little I got from the time, I was in high school, which honestly was probably more puberty than anything. And as I was just generally frustrated by the subject, but I still worked out 4 days a week because that's just, what everybody was doing. And I was just super frustrated, but it was through my medical device that I realized humans are far more capable of producing force in very specific ranges of motion, the impact ready ranges of motion. And so that's where I started reading about variable resistance research, which there were many studies out there that showed that connecting bands to bars had weightlifters breaking records all over the place. Westside Barbell broke 200 records, world records, out of one gym. And really, what did they do differently? They would say they did a lot of things differently, but ultimately it's really just variable resistance. Now, they applied it in some interesting formulaic ways, which I think were not quite right. Now, another thing was Arthur Jones. So Arthur Jones had variable resistance. The cam of the Nautilus. So,
Right.
instead of a pulley, which is just a wheel, the pulley looked more like this. So it was a cam. So as you would push the cable that would run over the cam would turn and it would place more force on the stronger range of motion than the weaker range of motion. The problem is Arthur didn't have the same research he didn't have any research on variable resistance. It was just his idea. Like, he noticed that when you go to do a push-up, like, this part is real easy. It's when your nose is against the ground that it's hard.
Right.
So, okay. So what he was doing is, like, from strong range to weak range, he had a ratio of, like, X to 1.2X, where you should really be more like 5X out here. So he didn't have the ratio right, and who could blame him? Because he didn't have any information to go on. He was just guessing.
Well, even with the powerlifting, I mean, I can sure some people would hear that and maybe push back and say, well, that sounds maybe theoretical. You're taking a best guess, convenient guess. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but if someone say, I mean, how do we know for sure that there's a lot of things that Westside maybe did. How much of that thought you really think was from resistance bands, or even just?
Well, I think all 200 records they broke were because of variable resistance.
Okay.
I got a lot of powerlifters that tell me that. So that wasn't my idea. But if you look at the research, the higher the variability, the bigger the difference. So the 5X thing was a combination of what I saw in the clinical trial of my medical device, which people were actually 7X at the top. But it was more like it was just the combination between that and all of the variable resistance research that showed that the higher the ratio, the bigger the difference between strong and weak range, the better the results.
It almost seems, and again, this popped in my head now, but this would be something I could see the listener hearing this, that you didn't invent the 41-inch band. I mean, that 41-inch band, that distance has been around for a long time, right? So it seems kind of really convenient. I'm not saying it's wrong or that you just did that, but that would be given off all the research you're saying and what the 7 times and all the different the levels that you're saying should be ideal, that maybe there'd be a more ideal distance for certain people, that just conveniently throwing on the 41-inch and doing your whole system with a standard 41-inch band. I guess I'm kind of jumping the gun here. Is that just best because it's so convenient and efficient to just use a 41-inch band, or in a different situation, do you think there's a better method? Because I can hear someone saying, so that sounds awesome, but he just took a 41-inch band and kind of threw it on a bar, something that was you could have maybe thought of on your own. You know what I'm saying? I know no one has. It's another point I want to say, because before you, I don't think anyone else did do that with a bar
which
platform.
Is why I own all the patents that have anything to do with anything that looks like X3. But yeah, I mean, when developing a product, it's like if you're going to start an automotive company, you're going to start with probably an engine that you can buy, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to creating your own brand new engine. Like, engines have been around a long time. People already make good ones. You can start with a crate engine. So there are already 41-inch bands. The question was, how do I conform to an existing part with the parts I'm going to develop?
Mm-hmm.
So, the different distances, doubling up the band. Like, I'm the first one that was doubling it up.
Really? Okay.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah.
I never saw that before.
Let's go back to Arthur Jones again and Mike Menser and High. I get stumped in too, but just how influenced were you by and it's kind of going back to with variable resistance. We'll probably jump into this too, but how influenced were you with what they were doing, or just high intensity training, and how different is high intensity training to what you're describing here?
Well, variable resistance is a totally different resistance curve applied to the body. It's the curve that is more similar to how our muscles activate, also considering the leverage points in the body. Like, we have very poor leverage back here. We have much better leverage here. So it's really like, what are our maximum capacities in certain positions? And then how do we most closely deliver in line with those capacities in relation to where we are weaker? So it took a lot of experimentation, but ultimately, like, getting that 40-inch band doubled up, or depending on the movement.
Well, maybe more specifically, and jump into the specific training, where I think your training is talking about the system has a one set philosophy, relatively low frequency, especially when you're talking about just exercises in general. We'll get to like frequency later on specifically, but Arthur Jones talked about really just doing like, one all out set to failure. You're talking about doing partial reps. How much of that was influential?
So the fact that when like all other stimulus in the body and adaptation, it requires one intense experience. Sunlight, how many sets do you need to do in the sun to get a suntan? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard this from Mike Menser. That's why I think about when I hear you say that, I'm like, that sounds like something Mike Menser said, or the Arthur Jones crowd was saying too.
Exactly. I didn't know Menser ever said that. There's a lot. He made a lot of video, or at least audio that now turned into like video.
Well, the same kind of philosophy.
I didn't know Menser said that, but the one said it's just like every adaptation we have comes from one experience. And of course, my background, my PhD dissertation was written about bone density. Bone density is exactly the same thing. The minimum dose response for triggering bone growth in the hip. That's the most important part of your body for bone density, the hip joint. Minimum dose response is 4.2 multiples of body weight. So they had people, hopping up and down and getting 4 multiples of body weight. It did nothing because you need 4.2. Not 4. So it's monumental in that intensity and adaptation. Like they go together.
Now you absolutely need that, because I'm just thinking, what about, again, somebody who just increases bone mineral density, not doing something like, you're saying it's not possible. So how would you explain, I guess, somebody who maybe did do that? If there's any research saying, well, just traditional barbell weightlifting, they're able to stimulate bone mineral density or bone growth without doing what you're saying, without 7 times, that's what you said, 7 times.
It was 4.2.
4.2, okay.
Minimum dose response. That's what the research found, and that lines up with what we know about adaptation. Is there's a minimum threshold. It's sort of like if somebody goes and trains light, calisthenics people,
right?
They look just like yoga people because they're not growing any muscle. They can fool themselves and do a ton of calisthenics and maybe even get lean and look athletic, but if you're trying to gain muscle, there's no getting away from heavy.
Yeah, and I guess the argument maybe again would be those, because I'm sure there's some calisthenic people yelling at the screen right now, would be, well, maybe they are, it's just like we're just maybe saying semantics here. They're doing some sort of progressive calisthenics, adding weight on,
or all of a sudden they're doing one-arm pull-ups.
Right. Well, okay. Right.
Well, then that's not really what we would typically call calisthenics. You're
right.
adding,
right.
So like, even they have to go in that direction ultimately. Otherwise, if you're not using progressive overload, if you're not introducing a slightly greater experience where more force is going through the target muscle progressively.
Well, it's very interesting. So just kind of end that point, Arthur Jones and everything. You're saying you didn't, as far as his whole training methodology, you're just somewhat maybe weren't familiar with it, the high intensity stuff of like just doing one all out set. Was that, or that didn't play a factor at all? Because the similarities are so apparent when I look at your programming and go back and look what those guys are really saying, or just high intensity advocates.
Definitely. So here's what they got right: is it takes one set. The problem is the stimulus that they're dealing with regular weights is poor. So in their application, I can understand why it didn't catch on, because people tried that and then they did like 5 or 6 sets per body part. And well, in the beginning, they grow more from 5 or 6 sets than they do from the one. So they just kind of ignored that.
Is it poor in application, or is it poor more so is it poor just that's hard to get to failure in one set using traditional barbells and the machine, or is it just
the fatigue you go to only involves the weaker range of motion? But when you're using variable resistance, you first fatigue the strong range of motion, then medium ranges of motion, and then you fatigue the weakest range of motion. So it's you're truly taking the entire muscle, all the cells, to fatigue. Whereas in a normal set of weightlifting, I don't care how hard you're trying, like it's only a small percentage.
And then let's wrap up the personal stuff, and then getting to like company brand stuff. How do you deal just with you probably get a lot of haters. So how do you deal with just haters and negative feedback? Because I think as far as what I've seen, you're up there. I mean, not the top of the sphere, but you can definitely get some. You have your own following though, for sure.
Well, so okay, like I've never said anything controversial. I've never made any claim that didn't have scientific research to back it up. That doesn't mean people like what they hear. You know, for some reason, we live in a society of crybabies who, when you show them evidence, they're like, well, okay, so like it's science. It's not here for you to like. It's here for you to learn from. If you choose to ignore it, okay, that's your choice. But you know, ultimately, whatever your sport is, or if you're one of those guys who thinks your Mr. Olympia is the next backyard barbecue where you get to take your shirt off, somebody's just going to be bigger and stronger than you because you just ignored the obvious. Like I'm making it obvious. Like I could not be more crystal clear about this. Like variable resistance will grow muscle faster. Now, I also say faster. However, that's not quite true because most people don't grow muscle at all. Most people are just in the gym thinking that it's going to happen. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is nobody wants to believe they're wasting their time. So they'll go and repeat the same that did nothing over and over and over again, thinking, maybe I need some chromium picolinate in my diet, or some, they believe some ad or something like that. But like when I make that statement, weightlifting is a waste of time, I can back it up. The top 1 percentile of body fat in this country, in the United States, is 11%. It's actually 11.7, I think. So almost 12%. Well, if the best 1% is like, you can sort of maybe see their top 2 abdominals, like who's really fit? Like, I think the problem, like social media has really delivered this problem, but we got the 12% issue. And then if you do a search on like not getting any results from weightlifting, I made a post about this yesterday. It's my Halloween post on Instagram. There's over 1 billion search results when you say weightlifting is not working or I'm not getting results from weightlifting. Well, are there 1 billion articles in existence on a planet where there's only 9 billion people because everybody's just doing great? I don't think so. Like they're screwing the pooch left and right. They're Googling it, but they're not admitting it. Because to admit it, I mean, maybe that's just like waving a flag and saying, I don't know. But they're not coming to grips with reality that most people are not getting any results. In my TED Talk, I talk about the genetics of like the tendon positioning, where most people, myself included, my tendon insertion, my origin of my pectorals here, insertions here. Some people have a mutation, so it's over here. And those are the people that end up in the NFL because everything they do, they can leverage more muscle. They're engaging more muscle. They're almost doing band training inside of their body. So they're enabled to activate more muscle than the rest of us. But the rest of us want to go and emulate what the pro athlete does. But that guy's an outlier. So what he does is not going to work for you.
And so, I mean, you're saying with your product in just X3, and this was a question I was going to ask you towards the end too, just is it, the pushback I would have with what you just said would be that people aren't getting results because it just takes a little time, some dedication, and consistency. And most people just don't do that. They kind of give up before they actually started. That would be one thing that pops in my head. And just improper programming or whatever. I'm not saying they're all lazy. I think they're just not knowing what hard work is. They need someone as far as like a pushing person in the gym. And I don't know if you're saying that like just the weightlifting and the traditional means going to the gym just doesn't work, or it's not as efficient as say your product. Here's what you do. Here's the plan. You just do it, and you'll more likely see results than just spinning your wheels in the gym, not knowing what you're doing. Is that more or less kind of what you're saying? Or you're saying literally there's a flaw just going to the gym that is inherently kind of not as efficient as just using variable resistance?
It's so inefficient that most people beyond just beginner gains. There's a great study that I referenced. I think it was 2 posts ago. That talks about adults and weight training. So they allowed people, it was like 104 adults. They trained for a year and they measured their results. Now, I believe they got their gains from the first couple of weeks because that's just how it works with most people. But the point of the story wasn't what they gained over a year. The point of the story was subsequent years and how they would either, what would happen if they just continued to train. Not a single person grew any muscle after the first year.
This sounds a lot like high intensity people's claims too. I'm not saying it's bad, but it sounds so similar to what you're saying, that a lot of people just kind of get in the gym, they're kind of used to it in volume, and just they find something that works initially and then just can't spin the wheels. That system no longer produces results. Just going in there, pumping up.
I think if you're holding a static weight, all systems will produce that exact same result because there's so many limitations in the human body for picking up a static weight. Think about what we do functionally. When we sprint, we use 7 degrees of flexion behind our knee, yet we have 180 available. You're only strong range training when you're sprinting. Why? Why not use the entire range of motion? Well, it's super inefficient. That's why. Now, when it comes to growing muscle, blood flow is huge. Like, you need massive blood flow, so a full range of motion is good. But the same resistance through the entire range of motion? No. That's all.
Awesome. All right, definitely. We'll probably hit that again in a second. Let's jump to just your company and the brand. A big pushback I hear a lot just with your products is that we can maybe do two of the same issues: the high cost and just the fact that there's the exclusivity nature of it, that I can only get certain products unless they kind of buy in initially. So I guess what's the business? Why the rationale between the business model and maybe the price tag of the X3 product?
Oh, you mean like to get the force bar you are already
yeah. Instead of saying I can pick and choose what I want, like a la carte in the package, I don't know, something like that, but or just buy the bar, or just buy the bar itself. People might say, I just want the bar. I can.
So okay. So I borrowed this philosophy from Apple Computer. I'm not going to let you buy something so that you can use it inappropriately and have a bad experience, because then you'll say X3 doesn't work. So get the whole package and use it correctly. Those are your options. So like if somebody just wants to buy the bar, it's like, well, okay, you can't use it without the ground plate. Without the ground plate, if you put any heavy loading on your ankles, you'll break an ankle. So like, why would I sell you something that you're almost guaranteed to use incorrectly? Like, buy the whole thing. No, it's a safety thing, but also just an experience, like if somebody buys the bar and thinks they're going to stand on a heavy band and do 500-pound deadlifts, they're going to have 2 broken ankles and they're going to say, well, X3 hurt me. No, X3 didn't hurt you. So,
well, I think that might get into where, we said earlier, I think it's your confidence in your brand and your product, I think, comes off. Or I think anybody who has a company probably is going to stand by and have some outlandish claims or any kind of a claim, anything. But I think the difference with you is that I think you really live by no problem saying what you're thinking about your product to the masses versus someone else might not say it.
That's the thing. It's I don't know everything about sports science. There's a lot of aspects. It's like so many different facets to sports science. But when it comes to variable resistance, an inch deep and a mile wide. Wait, did I say that right? I'm an inch wide and a mile deep.
Yeah,
that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So I just, like it's when you get all of the. I really did.
That's okay. I got what you're saying as soon as you said it, but yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if you just look at it enough, you'll just say, wow, like I need to do everything I can with variable resistance, and the hell with everything else. And of course, as soon as I made this decision, which is right around my 40th birthday, I decided about 6 months earlier when I had my prototype developed. My 40th birthday, I picked up my prototype from the machine shop. It was a race car kind of custom builder. I put on, 30 pounds the first year, 30 pounds of muscle the year I turned 40, which is usually after 40, you're not gaining anything at all. And so I thought that was absolutely spectacular. And then I continued to gain more after that. So for me, it was 20 years of weight training got me nothing. And then 1 year of variable resistance gave me 30 pounds of muscle. I've been trying for that 30 pounds of muscle, you know, before that. And it just came, it didn't come easily. Like I had to go to fatigue for sure, but I was going to fatigue with weights,
And were
killing
you
myself with
were you
weights.
doing that system pretty much more or less? Was there any tweaks to what you did at that time as far as like the exercises you chose, sets, reps, frequency?
I've changed my position on a couple things, mostly because newer research came out and, just learn more. I used to tell people like don't use straps because you want to develop your grip strength. But there was a study about a year ago that said you're really not going to be able to develop your back unless you use straps. So if you're doing any other grip exercises, so now for deadlift, I think it's okay to use straps. Not for
I,
the
I think
other.
that'd be good for your product too, because I mean, I heard people complain like, oh, you can drop the thing on your foot, which I think as long as you're holding it properly, it starts to get heavy, holding on to alternating grip. You're knurling so intense. I don't know how you're going to possibly do that without some sort of warning. But I could see
Right.
you just selling some straps along with it. Probably save that user error of hurting yourself. Not only also lift some more.
Well, I mean, also the whole like you could drop it on your foot. It's like I see almost every time I used to go to the gym, like somebody would drop something. Like, yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
drop
Yeah.
weights. Try not to drop it on yourself. Like that seems self-explanatory.
How about the cost of the product? Just justifying. I just did a video on this today. I mean, I think the cost makes sense to me as far as marketing. If you're going to find something similar with just base level parts, I think
Right.
to me, it makes sense. But I do think off the cuff, if you looked at it initially, it can turn people off. I think as people are
Yeah.
thinking $500 weights, equipment, when you see
So
bands in a bar.
in the world of social media, people will have a tantrum about price no matter what. I met an X3 customer, an X3 user. The guy makes vinyl stickers with Disney characters. So he has to pay a license fee to Disney, and the stickers are nice. They're vinyl. So like you stick them on whatever, and they're probably gonna last for a long time. It's like $2 a sticker. The guy gets death threats daily from mothers and parents. You how dare you create a sticker with Mickey Mouse and then sell it for
That's true. That's a
$2?
true story.
Yeah, it's a
That's
true
funny.
story. And the guy was just like, "Hey, you're doing the Lord's work. Like, you're just saying it how it is. And you're selling an amazing product, and people are going to complain about the price." And then he told me his story of his business.
That's funny.
So there's just going to be people who complain about price of anything. I don't care what it is. But when it comes to X3, the people who complain about the price are the people who have never seen it. It's like once you grip it and feel it and realize it's solid steel on the way through, you can load the thing with 1,000 pounds, multiple bands if you want to, if you need that level of force. And most really strong people do, because with variable resistance, you're dealing with more weight than you ever would with in a gym. So like it needed to be built with an exceptional level of quality, because you're just handling so much more weight. And that's why I changed the strap line of the product to greater force, greater gains. And now we have the force bar, which you have sitting right behind you.
Mhm.
Um, that force bar is recording and analyzing all the force you're creating in one set in a form of total force. So we sample 3 times per second to see how fast or slow somebody's going in the repetitions, how much time under variable tension there is, so we can actually get a metric to quantify progressive resistance. There really hasn't been one before. Like people count reps, but one set you do fast reps, another set you do slow reps is totally different. And there was never really a way to tell until now. Now it's like laser precise.
And how about just the product seems so simplistic? Well, first going back to what you said actually, because I was one of those people when I first saw them, like, I mean, it seems kind of overpriced. But when I got it right away, the packaging and how it was branded, again, I don't even want to talk like this because it sounds like I'm just, again, giving lip service to you and the company. But I mean, I didn't. I'm like that. This is awesome. The way it's packaged, the way it looked. And then of course using it and then using it properly, which I was not. I think part of it was because I was kind of falling on. I didn't care resistance bands after a while. I started using it enough. They're kind of annoying, strapping them up. But then the efficiency of it and then actually going slow, because I was just used to kind of going faster. Also with my total gyms, I feel like I kind of had to go faster, how I kind of felt more of a benefit from it. Once I started using it, I'm like, okay, now I can see, yeah, I can see that this works a lot better. How do you avoid just kind of the knockoffs? I think there's going to be, you kind of set the stage for this type of market. It seems, or I don't want to call it a market, I mean, this area. How do you avoid kind of knockoffs on something that is relatively simplistic as far as a bar platform? And do you think there's going to be some improvements on the line? Do you have any thoughts about how to just capitalize on what you've kind of built here? You've already capitalized on it, but I guess hold down the fort, you know? Yeah.
Oh yeah. There are advancements. The force bar being, such a big advancement. Being able to quantify progressive resistance, like nothing does that, not in any serious way. I mean, you could say maybe tonal does, but the problem is like strong people can't use tonal. Like tonal's really designed for sort of an elderly woman, just because it maxes out at 200 pounds of force. Well, when I do single leg squats, I'm holding 350 pounds on each leg. So like, what's tonal going to do for me? Nothing. And there's no getting away from heavy. That's the other thing. So the competitors, the knockoffs, I've shut down 7 companies already and seized their assets because I have patents on. I've over 30 patents on various aspects of the design and the technology. So while it's simple and elegant, I own it.
Okay. All right, cool. So that's a basic good answer. Yeah, let's get into just the variable resistance science. So we kind of already hit on this a little bit, but a common pushback I hear, you kind of already said this, but I guess what would be your answer again directly if someone's saying, especially for a home gym, like why waste, I already got a squat rack and some dumbbells, or let's just stick to what I already know what you're going to say. We've already got into it. Just what kind of quote unquote works. It's been around this many years. Why break something?
Yeah, right. My answer is, does it? Does it really work? Like, I mean, hey, if you're one of those guys who's a genetic outlier and, no matter what you do, like there's an NFL player I met who told me the most muscle he ever put on was the summer he was in high school where he was mowing lawns for a job. And he said he put on like 45 pounds of muscle in a summer. And, but the guy was just an absolute like muscle building machine.
I'm convinced most athletes would be better off not doing anything, honestly. I've heard that from even like Bo Jackson, who's told us don't even do anything because you're wasting your energy and wasting your time.
Right. And also, like, I mean, he might become like Bo Jackson. It's a shame his career was so short. But it's like if he put on any mass, it might have actually slowed him down.
Yeah.
Like, you're right. He was like, just don't do anything. You're perfect. Yeah. So he definitely is one of those with the longer tendons. And so like everything he does, it's like he's using rubber bands inside of his body.
Well, of course, I'm thinking people are going to think, well, I guess again, my thought process would be that if I was selling your system to something else, I would personally say, and I know you'd probably disagree with this, but I would say they're both useful tools. I heard someone say the other day, which was great, that some comment in some video that you had or somebody's video that the X3 is like the biggest middle finger to the fitness industry because you're telling me I can do all this resistance training so much more effectively and efficiently with these things that weigh less than 10 pounds by themselves, but produce equal to or greater results. So that's something I'm kind of thinking about. But versus I can see someone else saying, well, I do get good results. I'm working out, I'm using weights my whole life, et cetera, et cetera. I guess the pushback you probably have, we didn't even talk about the safety, just the wear and tear in the joints. That's something else I know people constantly suffer with. I have a cousin who just literally wrecked his shoulder, young age, firefighter, and 100% was from chronic weight training. There's no question. We're doing something wrong consistently.
Sure. So, yeah, I do kind of disagree with it's to me, but it's not fair. Like when I tell somebody what's in the literature, there's no ambiguity. Like most subjects that are researched, there's one answer on one side, like eggs are good for you, eggs will kill you kind of thing, or vegetables are great for you. Oh, they're loaded with oxalates. No, they're not good for you at all. When it comes to variable resistance, it's only one side. It gives you way better results, and no one has found anything different. There was one study that claimed that variable resistance was less effective, but the exercising group was allowed to train with however much weight they wanted. In the variable resistance group was only allowed to use TheraBand by itself. So it's like 5 pounds of force. So the people that trained with 5 pounds didn't do as well as the people that trained with however much weight they wanted to train with. Okay. So that study was designed to be fraudulent, and it was, but it's like, once you read it, it's just like, okay.
Well, I know some of your stuff. You had some. I did look at some of the references you had in the book, and I've seen some in the past. I think you're right that variable resistance clearly does work, and in some instances, I mean, you might probably say all instances, it would outperform resistance training in general. But
for sure,
you had one in there. I think that I think people have criticized the idea of like, well, there's one group that had resistance bands, one that was using resistance bands and weight training, and the argument would be, well, the other group, they were still using weights in some fashion. Or I guess if you're comparing resistance bands to traditional weights still had there's a history on traditional weight training actually working and producing results. So even that point alone, how would you address that? Just looking at research studies saying, well, weight training has done from X,
I would say, weight training has some results, but it goes back to the delusion. It's like the studies, like, who volunteers to be in a strength study? People who like strength training. Why do they like strength training? Because they get results from it. So you're going to get a higher percentage of genetic outliers. But like my first reference in my book, Petrella 2008, 27.6% of people who lift weights will never grow any muscle, no matter what they do with regular weights. That's a huge group of people.
And you're saying that would not be the case with resistance trends. There's not just some genetic thing. Or just doing something improperly. It was a matter of just the weights did not work for them.
Well, that's not what the study concluded. It just said that these people, when training with weights, will never be able to grow muscle. I mean, that would have been a much better study. It would help me more. But no, that's not what it researched. So I don't want to overstate what that study said. What the study said was these set of people cannot grow any muscle. I've never met a person that can't grow muscle with X3.
Okay.
Every person who's come to me, and it's just like they hear my talk track and they're like, dude, I've been lifting weights for a long time and I've done shit to me. And then I got X3 and, I'm a month in and I look totally different with my shirt off. Like, muscles are finally growing. I've been trying to get them to grow for years. So that's addressed, but also when you understand the tendon and ligament thing that I talk about in the TED Talk, there are certain people who engage more musculature when they move, and it's less than 1% of the population. And these are the ones that end up in the NFL. And the rest of us, maybe some people have, instead of the tendon insertion here, it's a little bit further over on the bicep. But it's not necessarily all the way at the other end, because there is variation. It's not like one or the other. But for the most part, I don't think it's successful. Like, when you look at the data and control for things like genetic outliers are attracted to being participants in studies, when you take out the fact that most of the messaging came from fitness marketing in the first place. It's funny. People accuse me of being manipulative in marketing. Nobody's more manipulative than the fitness industry, because 99% of people get injection. Nothing. They go for years. They don't look any different. And like when I was at the TED Talk, I said, okay, raise your hand if you know multiple people that are all about going to the gym and they've been doing it for years and you would never know they've ever exercised. Every hand goes up. Of course. That's most people who go to the gym. They're not getting anything out of it, but it's this, the fitness industry has done a great job of showing you genetic outliers and acting like that's normal. I mean, like, for example, people even manipulate themselves into believing this shit because they want to believe it. Think about this. So I say social media is delusional. People go, well, maybe it is, but not for me. Oh, okay. Well, number one, how many really fit people are there on Earth? Maybe like 1,000, like 2,000. We got 9 billion people, 8 billion people. Like, where are they? Where are all these people hiding that are just all like, just in great shape? My argument is there's only a couple hundred or maybe 1,000 or maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000 if you want to be really crazy. But we're all following the same mother.
So you're saying that's just
Everybody's
mostly
following Chris Bumstead. Everybody knows who Jeremy Buendia is. Here's a way.
It's
Any
genetic, though, is
listener,
what you're saying. You're saying it's genetic is what these outliers are walking around. That's not so much the training they're doing. They could be doing
drugs are
anything.
involved too.
Okay. But but
Yeah.
still, I guess I think that's a hard pill for people to swallow, because I hear what you're saying. Part of me still doesn't know if I'm really grasping if you really mean that literally you think that majority of just going to the gym, traditional weight training techniques just don't work, which I think that is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because part of it, I mean, I would think from what I'm seeing, but my own personal experience is that it generally doesn't work for people that aren't putting in consistent effort. People aren't consistent; they don't put in full effort. That would be my 2 cents.
And I would argue that they don't put in consistent effort because they've been at it for a while, and they look in the mirror and they're like, nothing's happening. I know one of the weirdest things about X3 is we almost have 100% compliance. Like we ship a unit to somebody and they use it. And
I think that's the beauty about your system. I think that if I were to say regardless of if people want to believe what you're saying or not, as far as the history of weight training not working or working, I would say at the very least you have a package of a system that I think for the exercises that are there, if you follow what's on the card, your explanations on how to do it, I think people will 100% see results in a very simplistic.
Yeah, I made it easier to follow.
Yeah, it's very efficient and very simplistic.
But let me roll it back to people's sort of attitudes when it comes to fitness. So everybody's following. If you're into fitness, everybody's following like the same 100 or 200 people. I mean, I'm aware of this because literally everybody I know that has a great six pack has a supplement contract. Like they're making money with it. Like all of them. So it just shows you how rare that is. Like somebody with, like an incredible set of abdominals. It's really rare. And we're all pretending like everybody's going to end up like that as long as we're consistent at the gym. But here's how I prove to everybody that they are delusional and they're not looking at an accurate picture of the world. 75% of the Western world is overweight or obese. If you look at your Instagram followers or who you're following, if you look at who you are following on Instagram, are 75% of those people overweight or obese? Because if not, you're delusional. You're looking at people, you're constantly putting in your brain that what's on Instagram is what people look like, and it's not even close.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point for sure.
Yeah, people... when I go to a grocery store, high school kids will come up to me. I could be with my wife and they'll stop both of us and they're like, what do you do? How are you in this kind of shape? They act like they've never seen anything like me before. And I think the reason is they haven't. They see it online and they want to talk to these people, but then they're like, where are all these athletes hiding? Because I never see them at the gym. It's just a bunch of guys that look just like the Pizza Hut. Well, most gyms, I mean, unless you're in Venice, California, you walk into just about any gym and the people at Pizza Hut and the people, you could just interchange the crowd and no one would know the difference.
How important is your system, following your system? Because I think we could probably, I know you said that everyone who uses this system is successful. I would probably, if I was like a betting man, I would bet there's some people out there probably are not, just in the sense of maybe not doing it correctly.
Statistically, you'll be right.
So how important is this really following that system to the T? Let's talk specifically about the actual training system. We got the device, we got the exercises. How important is doing the one set and just the frequency you've laid out and just even those exercises?
It's pretty important only because the way people do it wrong like if they don't understand the principles behind it, that's why I tell everybody, just follow the program. Just don't try and adjust anything. Don't think by adding a set of pull-ups, you're going to get like double the growth. I mean, like that's what it says, in fitness marketing kind of thing. But like I very carefully plan the whole protocol and programming out. And the people that follow it, they do great. The people that try and adjust it, they do pretty good. Like they're not growing, like they're doing all right, but it's not like exceptional.
Do you still follow the system to a T, and how do you progress each week? Is it slower? Is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of thing? Or how does that look for you? Just progress on the X3?
So a number of studies have come out recently about the frequency of training. I know you really wanted to talk about this.
Yeah.
So there's a number of studies, and then it became a meta-analysis, and I think there have been some subsequent studies, and they pretty much all come to the same conclusion. And that conclusion is that if you train a muscle group once, 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times per week, you will have the same amount of growth. So back to Mike Mentzer, this really says, and Arthur Jones, it says that both of them were really wrong about overtraining. So, there's no detriment to training a muscle too frequently. However, there's no gain either.
Good point.
So really what this is saying is all you really need is 1 stimuli per week. So I had trouble swallowing this because I loved training every day.
Right.
And so I decided to run the experiment. I'd be like, well, I'm a hypocrite if I don't follow this research, because basically, like, if there's new evidence, I will put it to the test and see how it fits. And maybe I'll discover some limitations of the study, or maybe I'll determine that the study there's something wrong with it. And maybe we need to see a similar study to learn more about what happened. Because it's usually not right or wrong. It's like maybe described incorrectly. So what I then shifted to was doing just 1 set. I was always 1 set per exercise, but I exercise each body part 1 time per week now. Now I know that training volume is crazy low, but I got my digital display, I got my phone in front of me, and I want to show you my results here over the last. So this is my force bar application. I'm going to go to the year-to-date statistics. I was already strong before this calendar year started. But I have gone from an average total workout force created of 10,000 pounds to over 70,000 pounds. So 7-fold increase. And if you see my exercise time, I have worked out for 11 hours, 6 minutes, and 17 seconds this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So wait, when did you start doing the 1 exercise a week? So you do 1 session a week, or is it one A workout and 1 B workout, or 1 upper and 1 push pull? Yeah. So you do 2 workouts a week, basically.
I actually split it 3 ways. So I did like push upper body, pull upper body, and then legs.
Okay. But you're saying if someone wanted to, as long as they hit one of those, basically one of those exercises, core exercises a week, they're good.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I mean, for me, it became so difficult breaking my records every time that when I read this research, I'm like, I'm going to give this a shot, because I bet if I rest a week and then go back to it, like I'll blow my numbers away. And it has happened pretty much every week this year, as you saw in that chart.
How about just, obviously you're still looking, performing well. I mean, just how about just overall, how does that make in the grand scheme of, like, people might say that's strength, maybe as far as hypertrophy, just your body size, everything else, how's that looking? Versus when you went from 1 set, from that frequency dropping so much. And I guess the same question. I don't even want to ask it because I know the answer already. But is that the only thing you're doing is just X3?
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm doing.
All right.
You knew that.
Yeah, I knew that. But I had to ask, because people are going to say, like, well, are you doing, which is still kind of hard to believe. I think the only downside of the system, it is so efficient and so effective. So it is like, but I could see that the gym rat that's in all of us, like you, it's just your history going to the gym. It's like, maybe you want to do something else, or you just feel, that's the other question I had was, are there inherent limitations? I guess that's the thought goes through my brain is like, well, would there be something better if I could rig something? Would there be a better back exercise to do instead of the bent over row? You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. That's the first good question I've gotten in a long time. So yeah, ultimately, if cost was not a thing, you just were gonna like build a home gym and you were gonna make it variable resistance, and you had an X3, but you want to go, to the most extreme degree. Could you rig something up that's like as efficient or even better? Yeah, probably. But I mean, I could easily spend $100,000 on that.
Okay.
So yeah, and I mean, ultimately, a friend of mine, Matt Wenning, he's a world record power lifter. He's got a variable resistance squat device that, I mean, it's like the greatest thing I've ever used. It's $30,000 and it's one movement.
Well, this is something, and again, I don't know how you feel about just pushing other things at you, but there's this other thing I heard about that's this JYM, the Jim Stepani, the guy who's like a supplement guy. He's making this thing with Body Elastics, the company that makes the tube bands, and they're making this apparatus that's supposed to be less than 600, $800. I don't know. It folds out, but basically it's variable resistance. So it's, variable, obviously tension, but it's pretty unique. I mean, the way it's anchored, you can do benching, basically all sorts of stuff from it. If someone were to say pound, I'm just asking it. If someone were to say pound for pound, I mean, that one has more exercises, more options, possibly could be do all the things your thing's doing is better. How would you compete with something like that? Or that
It
be a
doesn't
tough
sound
one?
very portable.
Okay. The
But
portability.
yeah, I mean, am I going to have the only effective variable resistance home gym system forever? No. Just
Yeah.
like, yeah, there could be things that are, great in one movement and then, suck in another.
Okay.
I think part of, like, I have to decide really, are we blowing up the gym? Are we getting rid of gyms? Are we graduating from the idea that we got to go and hang out in a hive of sideways hat losers and pathogens and bacteria? I don't know if you know this, but the average dumbbell, because of the knurling, because you can't really clean in the knurling, it has more viruses, bacteria, and pathogens, 23 times more than the average public toilet seat.
I believe that. I've gotten way less sick from not being in the gym in the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm like, that's
Yeah, it's
that's the
gross.
thing that was probably causing a lot of issues.
Yeah, it's just like the disease exchange. Yeah, you can give someone what you got and you can pick up something else. What
So
convenience.
well, let's wrap up with this. Where do you see just the future of X3 and just what are your plans for the future with the product and just the brand?
So I'm making a documentary film about variable resistance. Not just about X3. It'd be like all approaches to variable resistance, because like while I make a super convenient product that boy, I believe is better thought out than any product I've ever seen for the breadth and depth of the strength training, mass building movements that people need. I want to go into like what the power lifters are doing with variable resistance. What pro athletes are doing, how NFL players love X3, but they already had variable resistance stuff in their gym. So it was really weird. Like, I go to talk to these NFL players and I'm giving them like a big dissertation, and they're like, "Oh, we actually don't even lift weights. We only use like bands. Your system can just get us heavier than what we have our set up as, at the training facility." And of course, this blew my mind. I was like, "Really? Are you sure?" Because that sounds crazy. So a lot of pro teams have rejected weights years ago and are sticking to variable resistance movements, mostly because of what Westside Barbell did. Westside Barbell does not get enough credit. I think part of it is, as soon as people started talking about variable resistance, they started calling it accommodating resistance.
Right.
Is I think It was
Yeah.
sort of like, is it Kleenex or bath tissue? Like they really wanted to own their own term. And
Right.
by doing that, they just kind of like got left behind,
Yeah. That's a good
which
point.
is just unfortunate. But yeah.
And you told me in the future, your thought is if you crystal ball, if everything goes as planned, that you think people are going to look back and weight training is pretty archaic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in 15, 20 years, people are going to look back. There's going to be kids that are go like, do you realize like our grandparents used to pick up like, iron weights like rocks, and they like thought they would be fit by doing that, and the kids will laugh and be like, what a bunch of idiots.
Well, I got to ask about the e-gyms. I get that was the other question I meant to bring up to you. Just the future, because machines now are a big equation, just technology. Couldn't you? What's the limitation when using resistance bands and using a machine replicating variable resistance, or is there any limitation to that?
No, I mean,
You kind of address tonal.
that'll be great. Like tonal, I think
Yeah,
tonal's a great product, but it has a cap at 200 pounds because otherwise you'll, tear it right out of because it's got to be installed in the wall of your house.
right.
Also has to be attached to something load bearing. But then they cap it at 200 pounds. So it's like day one, I wouldn't have been able to use that with any sort of relevance
But if it
because
was strong enough, you probably it would be theoretically it could surpass resistance band. It would do the same thing with variable resistance, but just with a computer or with a whatever magnetic
you
flywheel.
don't, there's no way to work your chest with the way that works.
Well,
But
couldn't you do just laying on a
do.
bench, just from the bottom? I have that expedience thing where it's coming straight down. I just kind of turn it on, turn it off, and it's like this. I'm laying on a bench.
Okay.
I'm just doing it.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There could be a lot of different spring loaded or magnetic clutch.
We didn't even talk about, and then I know we got to get out of here. We can wrap it up, but I know we didn't even talk about the distance. I know it's a big thing. Is why do you got that distance in the X3 bar? Why do you have it so close? Say for chest presses, that's the big thing.
Yeah, ultimately, that's a great question. So ultimately, like when you take a wider grip, you just go down. The range of motion is just shorter. So taking a wide grip is something that like lifters may do in a competition, but what they do in competition and how they train, two very different subjects. So X3 is designed for growth, not for a competition. So where are your pectorals more contracted? If the humerus bone is closer to the midline of the body or further away? Closer.
Yeah, closer. Yeah, and I've also just heard in general the point of rotation, whatever the point is moving, that point of rotation should be closer to that. So the hands closer to the shoulder.
I just point that out to people. Like taking a wide grip is great if you're in a contest.
What if you got just a bigger, wider person? There's probably a few and far between, but I guess maybe I don't know. That's something you ever thought about if someone could have the option.
I trained with Cedric McMillan, and it was perfect for him. I got great pictures from that training.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then also some of the linemen in the NFL, like some of them struggle to get them, but once they're in place and they start pushing it, no, they're great.
Yeah,
and they as soon as they're done, they're like, that's the best set I've ever done in my life.
Awesome. Well, I think you're onto something for sure. And I wanted to wrap up and just saying, even when I started recently, I did the one set maybe a month or two ago, and I was like, I just feel like I needed more. And that might have been more psychological because I've gone back to more the one set thing. And I can tell you right away, just for sure, some exercises like the lunge. We even talked about your squat belt, which is awesome. But immediately the reps just kept going each workout, doing literally that one set for that one time. I think I took in it was definitely a week between sessions, or at least 4 or 5 days between each leg session. And felt every time was progressive. So I got stronger each time. So there's something to that for sure.
It's when you only have one shot at it, you do it right. When you're going to do it a couple of times, you're kind of half-assing it the first couple. And then the last one, you're already exhausted from a cardiovascular perspective. You're already exhausted from a muscle glycogen perspective. So the fatigue you go to might actually be.
Well, even just take the days off, because some days I was doing like a day on, I would an AB, I would do the AB, like upper lower is what I was doing, mixing other stuff. But I would start with that single leg lunge is the first leg exercise each time. And it wasn't going anywhere. And I think because once I gave myself at least 4 or 5 days completely off of that leg and I came back to it, I was fresh and it was just each time now it just goes up.
Yep.
I don't
That
know.
extra rest. Oh, interesting. As far as the exercise interval, before the argument I was making was you want to work every muscle every 48 hours because we have there's a great muscle biopsy study. I think there's only one because there's not a long line of people that are willing to have a chunk cut out of their muscle every 6 hours to see when growth stops. You know, I wouldn't volunteer for that. But in those studies, it showed that muscle protein synthesis stops within 36 hours. The problem is, okay, that's when muscle protein synthesis stops. So that might be where you can conclude flooding your body with a high amount of protein, but that doesn't necessarily mean that at that 36/48 hour limit, you can reapply a similar stimulus because we don't know all of the other things that it takes for the body to set the stage for that. So the metabolite buildup, is it possible to, there's all of those metabolites, like if you stimulate and you don't have them there, then you can't really get any growth. And so it's the weakness of the biopsy study, because after the biopsy study, you can't tell that person to go train again because they've had 6 or 7 chunks cut out of their muscle. Like they're not able to train for probably a month.
Right.
So it's the cadence that was potentially incorrectly assumed. And I think what we learned from that, 1, 2, 3, or 4 training stimuli per muscle group yields the same result. What that's telling us is you just got to wait longer for the metabolites to come back.
Right.
And we just don't have a good read on that. In fact, we haven't even identified all the metabolites.
Among other things, I just might need more recovery and repair, just other than muscle protein synthesis and just metabolites. I mean, there could be a lot of other things, central nervous system, just fatigue and stuff like that. Yeah. I know it sounds like the high intensity people saying the same thing. Just because it's recovered doesn't mean there's other mechanisms in the body that might need recovery after the fact. We're just not aware.
I mean, ultimately, I know when I wait a week, I smash my record every time.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, I'll put all this stuff where to find you. I think that was awesome. I think we covered a lot of ground. People hopefully will be putting some people at bay, but maybe not. You might have angered a lot more people from this, but
maybe not. I just think that if you're willing to ignore so many pieces of scientific evidence, you're getting left out. Like, don't do that. Like I said, I've yet to meet somebody who bought X3. We have 300,000 customers, so I don't know them all, but I've yet to meet somebody that's been using X3 and just cannot grow muscle. Whereas almost everybody I talk to, it's like, how long you been going to the gym? Oh, 4 years. Like, how much mass have you put on in the 4 years? And they go, well, I pulled a hamstring. It's like they come up with excuses for themselves that it's a bullshit story they're telling themselves. And basically what they're saying is they haven't made any progress at all in 4 years.
I think you're sincere 100% too. I mean, that's the big thing. I think people might look at you off the cuff or just the program or the book and be like, this guy's just trying to sell me a product and a thing.
Sure.
But I think for sure the level of confidence in what you're saying, I think for me, definitely you're 100% sincere in what you're saying. So I think at the very least, you're speaking your mind. So I think that might be some people aren't used to hearing. But you say it how it is. But I think at the very least, I think people can respect that.
I have the same personality type, the Myers-Briggs personality type, the same one as Donald Trump. So I understand, like, I my whole life I've just said it how it was, and people were like, "Well, how could you say that?" And I'm like, "How can you not accept what I just said?"
Yeah, well, I think the argument I always tell people, if you were just trying to just sell product, it would be easier to not do what you're doing and just, here's the product, here's for sale. You can do some more flashy marketing and not be so in your face or not be so confident and say all these things that are so divisive from a fitness standpoint that might turn some people away. So I think
I get trolled about nutrition, and even my team here is like, man, you should just don't talk. Like, we don't make any money off of nutrition. Why are you
Right.
telling people to have, really low carbohydrates? Well, but they'll get better results.
We didn't even
So,
get into that. I mean, you told me some study one time about what was the minimum need of glycogen replacement?
it's 0.3. It's 0.3 multiplied by your body weight in kilograms. So I weigh I weigh a little over 100 kilos, but let's just say it's 100. So that would mean 30 grams of carbohydrates per day is my saturation point.
And that was based out of where? Where'd you hear that again? Just so people can look that up.
Meta-analysis, Professor Menno Henselmans
Okay.
was one of the authors of that study.
And that was already published, you said, or recently published?
It was recently published.
Okay.
And in the book, I say much higher carbohydrate
Right.
recommendation. But this one is a lot lower, and it was done with much more scientific rigor, and it was better study. And of course, the less carbohydrates I end up eating, the leaner I am, even while getting stronger. So I'm going to stick with that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up there. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Mike, this was great.
Awesome.
Well, if you get any other questions, and I'm sure there'll be, more after this, we can do it again. We can address the new set of questions.